But what I later began to find as I articulated my why as a leader was my job as a leader is to create an environment where you love coming to work every day. And that became my why.
So excited to have Rebecca here. We are going to be talking about workplace culture. And, specifically, I'll plug in kind of what that means in mental health, but I'm also a business owner. We see over 120 patients here a day. We have 39 employees.
Nice.
And, I am obviously attuned to mental health, and we still have issues around culture, right?
Yeah.
And we've had to do some things with culture and things like that. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. You know what? I like to say that my life can be summed up in one sentence. It didn't turn out the way it was supposed to. And by that, I just mean, I think we all start out our lives with maybe some dreams and some goals, and then life actually happens. and that's been my story. And it took me many years in my 50s now and 40s to look back at my life and say, you know what, it's okay that it didn't turn out the way it was supposed to.
Yeah.
So I've been through multiple different personal life events, traumas, changes, a couple of divorces, miscarriages, and adoption, which I know you have some experience with as well, but adoption of some high needs kids and single parenting through that. And
so you adopted as a single parent, or
I adopted, and then my husband chose to leave us because he decided he didn't want the kids after all. So
it's a lot harder than
it was.
You think you can just love on them and everything's going to be okay.
Exactly.
And it is. Adoption is hard. How old were they?
They were 4 and 7. Siblings, and within my family unit, I was an aunt. They were a stepbrother's kids. But so it was complicated from the beginning. It caused complication and rifts within my family of origin, and all of that to say during those seasons, I was also trying to navigate my personal life and grow and provide for these kids. And I didn't have a career mindset at that time. I really wanted to be a mother. I really wanted to be present with them. And fast
Were
forward,
you having to work at that time?
Yes, I was working different types of sales, customer service jobs. My first husband and I started our own business, so we were business owners as well. And did very well and were successful at that. And then he left us, and so I had to then go into the workforce. My second husband and I actually also started a business, so I had a lot of entrepreneurial experience, hiring and doing marketing and accounts payable, accounts receivable,
but
also corporate, and also a lot of loss and a lot of change and a lot of transition, and again, nothing turning out the way it was supposed to. When we thought we were going to adopt those kids, it was intended to be, we were an intact couple, and it was going to be a stable home and a stable family for kids that weren't in a very stable situation.
Right.
And didn't end up offering them that. And the second marriage, unfortunately, was worse than the first. So it caused a lot of trauma. We all were abused and had to get out of that very quickly many years later, and ended up here in Colorado Springs. And at 40 years old, second divorce, no career, straight line path, a lot of bouncing around, and having to really start over. And so I kind of look at my life as sort of that chapter, and then from that point on, how I regrew. Because the second husband was a foreclosure, a bankruptcy. I literally lost everything and came here starting over. And within a year, as a single mom, I got a job working on the phones in customer service at a really large organization with a great culture. I used to say that was like winning the lottery. But I also experienced that frontline employee experience, being on the phones, being in a contact center, and having not great leaders. And I was fortunate.
And not really wanting to be in a career.
Yeah.
You really wanted to be a mom.
Yes.
And kind of, I talk about this a little bit with my employees. Know your why, and it doesn't have to be because you're part of the full mission. Maybe it is because, you have to pay some bills and you have to work. But I still want you a part of the culture. I still want to be a part of that why, even if it's not your number one priority.
Exactly. And I didn't have a career plan. I didn't have a career mindset. I was just trying to pay the bills and take care of my kids. But I fortunately had a leader who saw a lot of potential in me. And within 3 years on the phones, I was promoted into leadership, which wasn't really a normal career path for that organization. I fast-tracked and passed over a lot of people. And They just saw maturity that I had brought from my life experience. And the first day that I was a people leader, I had an employee ask me, well, what kind of leader are you? Well, I hadn't really been a leader before, so how do you answer that question? I'd been in some youth ministry roles. I'd been a mentor. I'd done a lot of things in my church. I was a mom. And I said, well, I think I'm maybe just part youth pastor, part mom leader. But what I later began to find as I articulated my why as a leader was my job as a leader is to create an environment where you love coming to work every day. And that became my why. And the company also, through their benefits program, paid for me then to get my master's in leadership. And then I started to really understand the science behind my why. Like my why wasn't just something I pulled out of thin air. It's actually how humans thrive.
Right.
Go figure. It's actually how organizations thrive, is by creating environments where people love coming to work every day. It was so simple. And yet, every day I experienced leaders not doing that. I had experienced leaders who didn't do that for me, and I had peers that weren't doing that for their teams, and I just became sort of obsessed with creating that kind of environment. In fact, in my first year as leader, I attended an event called LeaderCast where a pastor named Andy Stanley spoke, and he was talking on the subject of bold leadership. And I still have this quote on my wall. This was 13, 14 years ago. He said, bold leaders are unreasonably committed to what should be. And I just knew organizations should be places where people love to come to work.
Yeah. And you know, there's a little bit of fear, I can say, as a mental health professional and doing my own personal journey and being an employer, there's a fear of creating a laissez-faire, no one cares, kind of taking advantage of you. And I can just, be vulnerable, right? It's, we talk about that, like that is a fear. And I think people compensate by just being in that command control.
Yes.
And relational is what's going to actually have them enjoy work, and want to be there and things like that. But I can see both sides now that I'm an employer.
It's so interesting. That's exactly the mindset I'm working to debunk. It's a myth. It's a myth, actually. And it's what's interesting is in the science of human behavior and organizational behavior, McGregor discovered this and wrote about this. He was a contemporary of Maslow, and he came out the theory X, theory Y. Have you heard of that before? It's one of the core principles of how companies are run. Theory X believes employees are inherently basically lazy and unmotivated, and we have to motivate them through
and people
incentives.
do talk more about that of the younger generation. Like there's this divide.
Yes.
And I've been guilty of it, and I have to, check myself and say it's not that way. But go on. So describing the negative, and then the opposite would be what?
Yeah, theory X is you need to motivate them through incentives or punishments, so threats and rewards, carrots and sticks, because they are inherently lazy. Theory Y is that people inherently love to contribute and do good work. We are made to be innovators, creators, inventors, producers, and our nature is to love to improve, to love work. And we don't need to be motivated by external things. We are intrinsically motivated. And that science has been deepened and more research has been done. It's basically empirically proven that we are intrinsically motivated by autonomy, mastery, and purpose. So when you can give people those three things, they will thrive. They will do great work. They will be highly engaged and highly motivated. The other thing I'll say, though, especially because you're in the mental health field, is then bring in trauma, right? So people are inherently motivated to show up and do great things and produce great work, and yet we're all inherently afraid. Because our brains are wired to be threat sensitive. Our neurobiology has conditioned us to be aware of risk and danger and avoid it. And we've experienced pain and loss. And so the brain says, I don't want to experience that again. That hurt. So we then also learn to avoid things that are scary and risky, which also is part of work. Work and inventing and showing up and having ideas and putting yourself out there is inherently risky to the self. So there is this undercurrent where trauma, the more you've been traumatized and hurt, humiliated, punished, rejected, the more you do put up your guard and your walls, and that can come across as lazy. It's really just afraid.
I can see that, but it goes both ways as an employer too. Like when someone is not measuring up, not doing their job, you know, sometimes it's easier to just let them go. You know, and when you've confronted it, and do you really have that kind of time? And I'm aware, and I'm not sure I have that kind of time to lead like that on a one-to-one basis. So what kind of practical things do you work through with leadership teams?
I do work a lot on mindset, because we do come in with biases, and these unconscious biases then affect how we lead and how we behave. I come in with some, like I said, the science and the research and case studies that are plentiful that show companies with, for example, high psychological safety, which psychological safety is not everything's easy.
So, okay, so X and Y is this your theory, or is this?
This is McGregor. This is basic organizational effectiveness theory. You can research McGregor. Theory X and Theory Y has been around since the 1960s. And this is what's interesting, is that businesses don't do what science already knows about how humans operate. And we have, because we didn't know this initially when the Industrial Revolution and companies started happening. You think about the evolution of companies. First we were farmers, then we were factory workers. And only in the last century have we started to become corporations and companies with offices and office buildings. And the office culture is still built on Industrial Revolution mindsets, and that has not changed. And that's really what needs to change, are the mindsets around how humans work. The science is already there, decades and decades of research. But we just haven't learned how to apply it in a corporate setting. So we were talking about psychological safety, for example. Psychological safety is a newer term, but in the last 5 or 10 years, Amy Edmondson really popularized it in 2018 with her book, The Fearless Organization, and her research around high-performing teams. Psychological safety is not about comfort and ease. It's a little bit uncomfortable. But it's about removing the risk and the social sting from uncomfortable situations, like asking questions, like making mistakes, like disagreeing, and like giving feedback. These are things that are instinctively risky to a human, and so we avoid them at our peril. But then when you have an organization where people are afraid to speak up, afraid to make mistakes, afraid to disagree, you lose out on knowledge, which is actually the currency of the 21st century. Knowledge is the currency. So you need to create a space where people feel free to do that. You do that by modeling humility as a leader. For example, when you come into a room and you have something to share with the organization, instead of asking at the end of that conversation, does anybody have any questions? Which immediately triggers fear. Oh, if I have a question, I'm dumb, right? Fear of failure, fear of looking stupid. And instead, the leader says, what did I miss? Which suddenly makes people feel like, oh my gosh, they need me. It taps into that intrinsic motivation to have purpose. So that's a simple little tiny technique. That's an example of when I teach leaders, just when you're running a meeting or sharing information and you want to hear from your employees and you need to hear from them, to invite voice, change the way that you have the conversation.
I think we do pretty well at vulnerability, but I'll tell you, practically, what do you do when someone is not doing their job after lots of...
it depends. There's basically failure. Let's just put failure in a category. Falls into 3 categories. And this is from Amy Edmondson's work as well. And the problem is leaders treat all failure the same when we really need to treat different kinds of failures differently. So one type of failure is a preventable failure. This is failure due to lack of skill, lack of knowledge, or not following a process or a procedure right. That type of failure needs coaching and training. And if it's repeated multiple times after coaching and training, there needs to be consequences, right? That's where you bring in performance management. This is someone who is not following the process, not demonstrating the skill, even after we have invested in them a bunch of coaching and training. There's a second category of failure, which is complex failure. This is failure that is very common in the workplace now, because when you think about our work, it's much more disruptive, much more complex. You have multiple people involved, multiple factors involved, multiple systems may be involved in your organization. And this is the type of mistake that you probably didn't see coming. You probably didn't plan for it. You didn't even maybe have a process for it.
Right.
That type of failure, it's not anybody's fault. It's really the complexity of the situation.
Well, it's our fault as leaders that we didn't have a process for it.
Well, you learn.
You learn as you go.
Oh, gosh,
exactly.
We need
yes.
to do better next time. And in that type of failure, you want to have really good after-action reviews. So really discuss what happened, look at the process, improve the process, brainstorm, figure out how to prevent it from happening in the future. The third category of failure is intelligent failure, which is when you're in a completely uncharted territory and you're trying something new and you've never done this before. And so you have to try something, and you probably are going to fail. Like 90% of the time, if you've never done it before, you're going to fail the first time. Those failures actually need to be celebrated, because that took bravery. That's where innovation happens. That's where discovery happens. And you really say, wow, I'm so glad you tried that. And like, let's do an after action review as well, but more as a brainstorming session. What else can we try?
Right.
That's innovation.
Yeah.
And so it's just in that first category of failure, when there's been coaching and training that's been documented, that people don't show improvement, that there needs to be obviously, career discussions.
Yeah. And whether this is your why, right? Like we kind of go of, is this really where you want to be?
Yeah.
And kind of coach them to their purpose type thing. So, as you're talking, I feel like, okay, we're doing okay. Everybody can improve. But let's talk about there's organizations out there that are really doing it wrong.
Yeah.
Obviously without names, can you kind of tell us what kind of behaviors, decisions, policies create a culture of people who don't want to work there?
Yeah, well, I think we talked about it before we started filming. It's the command and control mindset is so common. In fact, I just read a Harvard review article that was published in 2019 just this morning about shifting from command and control to coaching mindset, which we can talk a little bit more about what that is. But it's leaders who lead from an assumption or a belief, like I said, that employees are inherently lazy. So you see cultures of micromanaging. You see cultures of poor delegation, lack of trust, meetings which are run, very rigidly without an opportunity for people to speak up and share. Leaders who punish and humiliate, and I would say even embarrass, employees in public, like come out in public and say, like call them out in meetings instead of calling them out privately, things like that.
Okay.
And also just fixed mindset. So leaders or organizations or individuals who don't believe that we all have the potential to be our best and we all want to grow and improve, that limit our decision making, that are risk averse because we haven't done that before and we might fail, and failure is punished here. So it limits innovation, it limits the ability for the company to grow.
Yeah, I definitely see the limit in innovation. All my previous employment as an employee, I'm always the good employee. I don't want to get in trouble. I always do my job well, but I can see where there's no opportunity, that there was no opportunity to actually be creative, contribute. That's why I started my own business, because I couldn't share what, my personal creativity in someone else's place.
Yeah, you weren't able to grow and improve. You weren't given a platform because failure was discouraged or personality was discouraged. Toe the line, follow the policy. So just rigidity, unwillingness to change, unwillingness to see other perspectives, lack of humility. I sometimes say some of the most powerful things a leader can say in an organization in this day and age is, I don't know. Which we've been conditioned, again, over centuries, that leaders never say, I don't know. Leaders have to know everything, right? There's this fear of being seen as incompetent. But I'll come to a leader and I'll say, see, incompetence means you don't know anything.
Right.
and
hopefully you know something.
Right. But saying I don't know is not incompetent, because humility is recognizing you don't know everything.
Right.
And that's the distinction. So a
Yeah.
leader who feels like they need to know everything all the time is preventing employees with great ideas from speaking, is limiting voice, and is really creating a toxic environment. So saying I don't know is not a sign of weakness, it's a sign of strength.
Yeah. And I know you had some statistics you wanted to share.
Well, just the idea that we're facing a day, and right now, as you know, working in mental health, there is a mental health crisis going on in the world right now. I mean, it's not just organizations, it's the world is struggling with increased levels of suicide, increased levels of addiction, increased levels of divorce, domestic violence.
Yeah.
The world is increasingly fractured and fracturing. And I just see the workplace as a place to start contributing to change. But for the
because most of us are in
side,
it.
yes, because we're in it, right? We spend so much time
Yeah.
at work. If we can make the workplace a haven instead of a hamster wheel, where employees love coming to work and feel energized and equipped and seen and known and empowered and connected to a higher purpose, then that will have a ripple effect, because it impacts everything else in your life. Your work impacts your marriage and your parenting and your functioning in society and your civil community involvement and everything.
Yeah.
But the ROI, I did bring some statistics because I can never quote them.
Right.
But the cost of poor well-being. So when you're an employer and you're thinking ROI, why would I invest in this for my employees? There's $20 million of additional lost opportunity for every 10,000 workers. 20 million of lost opportunity for every 10,000 workers due to struggling or suffering employees. So employees that are struggling or suffering are not bringing their best selves to work.
Right.
This is all Gallup, by the way, Gallup research. They say $322 billion is the total cost of turnover and lost productivity globally due to burnout, employee burnout. $322 billion a year globally.
Yeah.
And then just personally for your company, you're spending about 15 to 20% of your total payroll annually on turnover due to burnout and lack of well-being. So you know what your total payroll is.
Yep.
15 to 20%
That's
of
good
that.
to put it into, because when you said those millions, it's like, yeah, but I don't
so
have 10,000
big.
employees.
Yes.
But when you said 15%, I know what my payroll is.
Yeah, that's a dollar sign for the small
Yes,
business owners. So
absolutely.
it's affecting the world. It's affecting small businesses, large businesses.
Yeah.
And then also employees who have the feeling that their employer really cares about their well-being are 3 times more likely to be engaged at work. They are 69% less likely to be searching for a new job. So they're going to stay. They're 5 times more likely to advocate for your company to other people as a great place to work. And they're actually 36% more likely to be thriving overall in their lives. So that's just if they believe their employer cares about their well-being.
Yeah.
So that's just one page of 3 pages of statistics I have on the benefits of employee well-being to the worker, to the company, and to the world.
Right. And I love the whole ripple effect. Like, we might not be able to change the big picture, but if we can change our culture and allow that to ripple. I'll tell you, we have a corporate program where we could come in and teach mental strength, and there has been a huge resistance. We have not gotten any large corporation to embrace that because there's this fear of opening Pandora's box. Like, I don't want to know my employees' trauma. Not that you would, but I'm just saying, like, there's this fear of mental health in general. And I always say we're all on a mental health journey, whether you want to admit it or not.
Exactly.
We're all on that journey, and it's more about bringing awareness to the journey so that you can be resilient, because we're all dealing with something.
Absolutely.
And the cumulative effect of that can break people, emotionally and things like that.
Absolutely.
And so how are you trying to combat that? Because I'm sure you're getting the same resistance.
Yeah, I am. It's some of those statistics. I actually have a worksheet that if a company comes to me and gives me their total payroll, their total number of employees, average salary, and their current attrition rate. So what's the percentage of employees that leave your company on an annual basis? Most employers know that as well. We can plug those numbers in and actually see the cost of attrition, so the cost of people leaving your company, And then we apply some of these numbers and say, if we were to boost their well-being by this much through these programs and lower your attrition by this much as a result, how much is that going to save you annually? And so I usually start, though, by asking companies, what are you currently spending on your employee well-being or your employee experience? Let's make it a bigger bucket, because I think employee experience is a more digestible term. Well-being is a component of that. But really, how much do you spend annually on your employee experience?
Okay.
Understanding your employee experience, so measuring it, doing surveys and engagement surveys and interviews and focus groups, and then responding to the gaps that you find. What strategy do you have in place to respond to gaps in their experience? So do you understand their needs, and what are you spending to try and meet those needs? And like, I think just focusing on mental health is a small piece of the puzzle. So I actually look at it from the organizational perspective. Are employees feeling burnt out because of the workload? Are they feeling stressed because there's no clear decision making and they don't really know what's expected of them? Are they feeling disconnected from your purpose or your mission? Are they feeling unseen, unheard? Those are things that cause micro stressors and contribute to employee disengagement and contribute to burnout. And I think that your program is a powerful piece because it shows employees they can be seen and known, which is a huge part. So,
and teaching them how to organize, because, you know, when things happen to us and we don't know how to organize our brain, it's just all a mesh together. And everything is emotionally connected. And so you're trying to leave your home stuff at home and come to work and be productive, but you're not really doing it insightfully. You're just kind of, I call it like white knuckling. Many people who are functioning and don't have a mental illness and have not gotten to the point of feeling like they need professional help are just white knuckling it. They're not actually, our tagline is embrace the journey of mental strength. Like, embrace it, like you're on it. So embrace the journey, figure out how to, you know, deal with, you know, current micro traumas that are, you know, bringing up past traumas, or, you know, processing grief. Nobody knows how to deal with grief.
We're horrible at grief. Yes, that's a whole nother thing. I'm a trauma-sensitive yoga instructor too, and that's been part of my journey, is being able to somatically experience emotion in our bodies, which we don't do well. We're all up here in our heads all the time. So,
well, I talk about the 5 cells in my grief book, and one of them is self-movement. You know, everybody talks about like exercise being a coping skill, and you know, the runners will say, that's my therapy. Well, I don't like to run. You know, like, any kind of movement, even, you know, listening to music is a vibrational movement that can process things out of the body. Yoga is, you know, I love yoga, you know, personally. So it's this movement of emotions out of the body, because otherwise they're going to come up and manifest physically.
They get stuck.
Yeah.
I love what you said too about the fact that we're all on this journey anyway, and that's part of, I think, why organizations resist this conversation, because they're thinking mental illness.
Yes.
And that feels like a Pandora's box, but mental health is just all of us wherever we are in the continuum.
Right.
Adam Grant really brought to the forefront a term called languishing during the pandemic, and that wasn't a new word or anything, but he did a lot of research that was this concept where employees are not thriving right now. They're not in a state of mental illness diagnosable, but they're certainly not thriving.
Yep.
So this is a new phenomenon in the workplace as well, this whole idea of quiet quitting and disengagement. And that's because the world has changed again. Have you heard of the phrase VUCA? VUCA, VUCA. It's an acronym actually coined by the military. The U.S. Army War College identified this state of VUCA, which stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And they coined that phrase after the Cold War, towards the end of the Cold War, to describe the environment that their military was dealing with out in the world in their stations of duty, and sometimes on the battlefield, sometimes just in diplomatic situations. Volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. The brain hates all 3. So it puts us immediately into our fight or flight state.
Yeah.
And when we're in our fight or flight state, we're not using our prefrontal cortex to reason, to think, to be creative, to come up with ideas, which is not great for soldiers in situations. So they actually created resilience as a program for soldiers to navigate VUCA, to navigate situations that are volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. Well, fast forward to the pandemic, and suddenly the entire world is plunged into VUCA chronically for
Well, it was only going to be
years.
2 weeks.
Right, exactly. And on the battlefield, sometimes it's only a couple weeks. Like usually VUCA is very acute. It's temporary. It's a situation you have to push yourself through and get to the other side of. VUCA is not usually the way the world is for 2 solid years.
Yeah.
And that extensive level of VUCA has literally changed our brains. Like the world literally is in trauma and has been in global trauma chronically for years. So our capacity has changed. And that's the other thing employers need to consider is when you're thinking about micro stressors in the workplace, maybe they didn't have as much of an impact a decade or 2 ago. Now, micro stressors in the workplace are triggering these people who are coming with a mental health journey where they're already languishing. They're already struggling to show up every day. They're already bringing this baggage and trauma from outside. And then when you add a workplace that feels fractured, that feels unsafe, that feels like I am having to navigate risk all the time, risk to my identity, they're going to disengage. They're not going to bring their best self. So Amy Edmondson had a quote in her book that just still really speaks to me around psychological safety, that the only way to create that in a workplace is for leaders to become obsessed with safety, for their psychological safety, because just a little bit isn't going to change the curve. You have to understand, this is her quote, how obsessed the human brain is with safety. Like we are wired to avoid danger from
Well, and I can tell you as an employer, my fear and trauma response is if everyone's not productive, I'm not going to be able to pay the payroll,
bills,
right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
you almost feel like you have 39 responsibilities. And so there's, I think, I'm actually processing this as we're talking. Like this whole, it's on both sides. It's not just, and the favorite thing that you've said that was brand new to me is just this mentality that, starting with, they're inherently lazy. Not guilty of that all the time, but I can be vulnerable and say that I've definitely been there. And so kind of definitely shifting that. That's a shift that.
Yeah. If we started instead believing we're all just inherently human, we're all just inherently wired for the same things. And that's where my workplace model comes. So my model is called Create Space for Your Employees, SPACE, but it's really just SPC, and the A and the C are plugged in. But create safety, create purpose, create connection. Those 3 things are what all humans need. We all long for safety. We all long for purpose and meaning and to be part of something bigger than ourselves. In fact, there's research that says that has a higher influence on well-being than anything else. Knowing you're part of something bigger than yourself, giving back to others, hugely significant to the brain. We're social creatures. And then connection. We all want to be seen and known as who we really are. We want to feel like we belong to something and that we're part of something. And those 3 needs can be met in lots of different ways in lots of different places. They can be met in family, right? They can be met in civic giving back in communities of faith or just community involvement. They can be met in our significant partnerships, friendships. But if they're met in the workplace, if your workplace offers safety, purpose, and connection to your employees, they will flock to you. And they will not only flock to you, they will stay and tell their friends, and they will do great work, and they will thrive as individuals. And then when I say thriving employees, thriving companies, thriving world, that's my vision. That's my vision statement. And so if you think of your employees not as lazy or as anything, but as just human beings, just like you and me, who have the same needs that I have when they come to work every day, how do I meet their human needs in the workplace? And it's not about ping pong or pizza. Right? It's about safety, connection, and purpose. And that safety piece is one I could talk for hours about because it is I know there's this fear of leaders have that it's just making them comfortable. It's not making them comfortable. It's making them uncomfortable, but having their back. That's the difference.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. Like I said, I think we're doing fairly well. We have a couple outliers. I wonder, and we're licensed, mental health professionals, so we know, motivational interviewing. We know how to coach.
Yeah.
Is there other things or techniques that you can use in kind of coaching the person who doesn't seem to be connected? That in our case, it's a couple outliers, but and then we'll talk about when the whole culture is messed up. But
Sure.
What do you do when you just have a couple outliers? We talked about there are times where we do have to let people go, but when it's someone we've already vested a lot of time. So it's so we're trying different things.
Yeah.
But any other coaching before the ultimate if you do have to let someone go?
Well, do you do any types of assessments of your people? Do you know what makes them tick? That's where I would start. First of all, there's lots of different assessments out there. I'm Gallup certified, so I'm a big believer in strength finders.
Okay.
I think it is one of the most statistically powerful assessments because there's a 1 in 33 million chance that you have the same top 5 as somebody else, which means it's very uniquely you.
Yeah, we've done a couple, and of course the names are. We did the Myers-Briggs one year. We do one per year as a team building.
Yeah.
What's the one that
There's
I'm trying to
DISC.
think of?
DISC is really common. Myers-Briggs Colors is really common. Those are the ones I hear.
Working Genius.
Most.
Sorry.
Working Genius.
We did the
Okay,
Working
yes.
Genius last year.
Yeah, there's also Lencioni's different genius styles. Yeah. So, but
You do which one?
I do Gallup Strength Finders.
Okay.
So it's really about your inherent talent.
Okay.
What you're naturally good at, your top 5 out of 32 different types of talent themes that they've identified through, thousands and thousands of studies. And they have identified these top 33 talents, and then you find your top 5, and then you get to learn who you are. And you get to learn who your people are. And the power of those assessments, to me, I think they've been misused in companies that use them just for team building. But I use them, and Gallup encourages that we use them as a coaching tool. So you coach to people's strengths. So as a leader, when you know what makes your people tick, and you look for opportunities to align their jobs with their top 5 talents, then they have the ability to thrive and energize. Think of it this way. I'm familiar with the movie Rudy, the Notre Dame football guy, right?
Yeah.
And really inspiring movie. Everybody loves it.
I think I've seen it 100 times because my
Yes.
husband's a football coach and it's his favorite movie.
There you go. It's a lovely, inspiring story. And if I'm going to be honest, in some ways it's a sad story. Because here's the thing. Rudy was never going to be a great football player. He was not inherently good at it. It's a wonderful movie about heart and spirit and energy, right? But if you're a boss and you're thinking about the people on your team, doesn't matter how much time he spent practicing and coaching, he was never going to be a good football player. That wasn't his natural talent. So Strength Finders is a way, instead of trying to focus on people's weaknesses and trying to make them good at something they're never going to be good at. Find out what they're naturally good at.
Right.
And everyone has that. And then put them in positions where they get to use those talents and they will thrive. So the amount of energy you put into someone's natural talent is multiplied exponentially because they can grow quickly in something they're naturally good at versus someone who's not good at it. It's just a slog to get better at it. And I should say this does not contradict growth mindset and fixed mindset, which assumes I shouldn't do that because I'm not good at it. Because it still takes practice. Growth mindset and fixed mindset is just about whether it's worth pushing through and struggling and putting effort into something.
Yep.
And effort is always worth it.
Yeah.
Putting effort into something is always worth it. But you're going to get more out of your effort if you know who you are and what makes you tick.
Yeah.
So that's one assessment I highly recommend, and I do with teams and leaders as well, to help them unlock the potential that's hidden within their employees. And it goes under the C piece of my SPACE model because connection is about feeling seen and known. Well, when you actually know your people and you get to uncover who they really are, they feel more connected and they feel like they belong. So that's a great place to start, I think. There's always going to be people who are maybe so traumatized that they can't push through, and that's where you come in with the mentally strong piece, because I think I am a little Pollyanna in believing that everybody is going to eventually thrive.
I am too. I want to save everyone. I do.
Save the world.
I've had to actually, put people around me that are more comfortable with saying, no, Dr. B, it's time. We've done everything that we can, because and this is what makes me a really good mental health practitioner of like, I can meet you where you are.
Yeah.
And everybody can improve. Everybody, regardless of where you are. But sometimes in the workplace, it's you can't be their mental health counselor, right?
Yeah.
So, and this is what's great about the Mentally Strong Method is because we actually are teaching your employees. Like this is, so all of our employees obviously go through the course, but then we have a all-day training twice a year, and we take several hours and we redo that, and it's like. You have to know you have to remind yourself how to take care of yourself. Yeah. And this is a nice, easy formula that anyone can learn. Love it. And, plug in your stuff and let's make some personal visions, and make sure that we're making choices in line with what we say we want.
Yeah. I love that you help companies take care of their employees that way and help the employees take care of themselves that way, which is even more important. Because there is this personal responsibility step part. I mean, it's not all on the employer. Yeah. And it's not all on the employee. It's a partnership. Yeah. So what can the employee do to take better care of themselves and be more mentally strong and be more resilient? And what can the organization do to create space and environment where employees can thrive instead of adding layers on top of their mental illness or mental health problems?
Well, and the leaders, if leaders aren't taking care of their mental health or not even acknowledging that they're on a journey, how can they grow, people that are under them and care for them and those kinds of things. Yeah, I see it as being a necessary for everyone to kind of understand that. But I do see the fear and the problem in the culture is not just in the workplace culture, it's in the actual mental illness culture that it is a disease to be fixed. Yeah. And there are some disorders, schizophrenia and things like that are clearly diseases to be fixed, right? But the majority of things that people are presenting with are part of just never knowing how to handle stress, life, resiliency. Mental strength is an attribute that we respect in people, but we don't teach it anywhere. No. And they don't do a lot of teaching for resilience in the military until after you come back from war. It's like, maybe we should be doing some of those things before, because what happens is these additional traumas that happen, they just pile up, and then there's a break. Everyone has a breaking point. And like you said, the changes that are happening in the culture and post-COVID, and just the changes in the fear and the economy and the world, and don't watch the news. I mean, it's just
it's information overload. Yes.
Yeah, we have too much information. So
I love that you're teaching
tell us a little bit about your company. We'll have the link to your website down below. But who are you looking to help?
Sure. So I am looking to help medium-sized early growth businesses who are really wanting to create this kind of a workplace where their employees can thrive. Essentially, when I think of my target CEO or founder, you're a CEO or founder who really truly already believes your employees matter and really wants to do great things for them, and yet there's still issues, and you're like, what's going on?
I thought I was really good with people.
I love my people. And that's where we come in and we look at processes and mindsets and beliefs that are hiding under the surface around that are creating micro stressors in your environment. So I like to say I help CEOs create the workplace of their dreams. So I'm not an evangelist. I actually don't work with toxic cultures. Like if you are an outright toxic leader, go have a nice day. I'm not an evangelist. I'm not going to try to change your mind. The data's out there. Like I was in that kind of corporate environment before, and I know what it's like to try and work against a CEO who wants to be in control and wants to have and believes that his or her opinion is what matters the most or whatever, my way or the highway kind of leader. But you are a heart-centered leader, and you're just kind of stuck, and you're only stuck because, again, companies are structured in a certain way: performance management, time off policies, meeting structures, decision-making matrices, delegation of duties. to break trust. They're built on an industrial revolution mindset where people are seen as inherently lazy and are part of a machine. And we follow certain things that we've always done it that way. We don't have to always do it that way.
Yeah.
The world has changed.
Yeah.
And again, it's a knowledge-based economy. That's your currency right now, is information and knowledge that your people have. And if you are running your company based on the way things have always been done, then there's maybe some opportunity to evaluate some of those policies.
Yeah.
The ways we communicate, the ways we run meetings, the ways we make decisions, the ways we performance manage. So I look at those policies, procedures, and mindsets that create a better workplace environment to help you create the workplace of your dreams. And I say 50 to 1,000 employees. I'm still starting this business, and so I haven't had enough clients to figure out the sweet spot size-wise. I say a company that has enough employees where there actually is now some processes and some structure there.
Right.
And also where you as the founder, CEO, leader feel a little disconnected, like you've lost some control because the company's grown, where you can't talk to every employee every day or every week. But not so big that I couldn't necessarily reach all of the employees through some of the workshops and the things that we do as well, and the coaching models that we do.
So most of our listeners are probably not business owners. They're probably employees.
Yeah, great.
What would be, like you said, a toxic environment might not be able to be changed. But let's say they know they can speak, they just don't know when it's appropriate, how to do it constructively, and being able to point out so that the organization can grow. And what would you say to those employees?
I love talking to those employees. I was one of those employees. And I know so many that still are, still are. And when I was, in my corporate job, I never finished my whole story, but I eventually worked up in this company into a lead HR role that owned corporate culture. So I got to that place because my passion shone through in every job that I had. I went into communications, I went into sales strategy, I went into a lot of different departments, but I was always focused on the employee, And eventually I worked in HR for 3 years doing corporate culture work. And when I would lead workshops and talk to employees, I started teaching psychological safety. That was my number one topic, was a leader toolkit for creating safety on teams. I kept hearing, yes, but I'm doing these things and employees are still afraid. And so I started to add to my body of work this idea of bravery. Because it's like a two-sided coin. Again, it's not just the employer and the employee, it's both, and it's not just leaders. The employer's responsibility is to create the safety. The employee's responsibility is to be brave. And that's where mentally strong comes in, I think.
Yeah.
And being brave also, though, starts with recognizing your leader's a human. It's not us versus them.
Right.
They're not out to get
We are
you.
human.
Right? They're not out to get you. Even the most evil is a bad, as in quotes, CEO who seems horrible, they're human.
Yeah.
They had a mom and a dad. They had a teddy bear when they were a kid.
Yeah.
They want the same thing, safety, purpose, connection. We're all in the same boat. So first start with that sense, know that your leader's a human too, and they're scared too. Their fears might be different. It's how am I going to pay the bills versus how am I going to grow in my career? But their fear's still there. The second piece is, and this comes from Liz Gilbert's book, Big Magic, which is around...
I'm going to have a whole book list after this.
I'm a terrible bookaholic. I'm like, my name's Rebecca, I'm a bookaholic. But her book, Big Magic, she talks about putting fear in the back seat. I think you would love her story. But she's the Eat, Pray, Love person as well.
Okay.
Same person, but different book. But anyway, she says that fear is always going to be with us. Fear is our constant companion. You can't get rid of fear. We have amygdalas, and they're unless we have an amygdalaectomy, that's the part of our brain that tells us what to be afraid of. Its job is to tell us to be afraid.
Mine's apparently on fire because I got a SPECT scan. And,
people who've been through trauma actually have enlarged them. I mean, it's brain science. You can't counter the fact we're all afraid. So instead of letting the fear drive, put it in the back seat. And the way that you do that is to acknowledge what fear feels like in your body first. We were talking about the body. It's important to be connected. So palms are sweating, stomach's got butterflies, my pulse is raising, my face is hot, whatever it is for you. I'm afraid right now. That's what that feeling is. First name it. I'm afraid. And then you think, what is it that's causing this fear? I'm afraid something bad's going to happen. All fear is a belief that something bad's about to happen. And most of the time, I won't say all the time, because sometimes a car is coming at you and you should be afraid. But most of the time, that's based on past experiences and memories. And those things aren't going to actually happen. And so it's a fear that something bad's going to happen. And just turn it around. Instead of focusing on the bad thing that might happen if you do this, if I speak up and disagree with my boss could get really angry at me and fire me. Okay, that's what I'm afraid of. Well, focus on the possible reward. What good thing might happen if you do this thing that requires courage? Boy, if I speak up and disagree with my boss, she might think my idea is awesome and it could actually improve this process that we're doing or this project that I'm on. So it's a mind shift to recognize your fear is just a belief.
Yeah.
What is it that you think bad's going to happen? And can you put that aside and focus on the reward? And that takes practice. It's a muscle like anything else, and we're not always going to be good at it. But that's probably part of your program.
Yeah. Well, and I can tell you just in my personal journey of being a business owner, I've always, in my whole life, I will not go into management. I don't want to manage people. Here I am. Right? But never say never. But, it was because I care. I care about people. I care about, my fellow employees. I see the human in everyone. Yeah. And when I got into business, and in the first year, I had some people who, honestly really hurt my feelings, right? Like they did things, and the advice given to people, starting business for the first time is, oh, you've got to harden up. You can't care. And it took about a year of kind of that, kind of having the fear at the forefront of like, who's going to stab me in the back next, type thing, to realizing that that's who I am. It's not going to change. I'm going to care. That doesn't mean I'm not going to get hurt. But trying not to care when you do care is impossible. It's mentally unhealthy for me, right? And so just like you said, employees that are listening, it's like your boss that maybe you think you have a problem with is a human,
right?
And they're probably responding on that same fear, or they have personal things, and getting down to that human level with people.
What could happen if you spoke up? What could happen if you set a boundary? What could happen if you, showed up for yourself and went vulnerable first? There's all kinds of science and research too around vulnerability. Yeah. And as Brene Brown says, vulnerability is the birthplace of courage, right?
Yeah.
So
love her.
I do too. Total fangirl. And so when you're vulnerable, you'll be scared, because the definition of vulnerability is putting yourself at risk.
Yeah.
So you're going to feel scared. But what's the alternative? Right? If you shut yourself off and you're never vulnerable, you miss out on all these amazing experiences, opportunities for growth and change and contributing to other people's lives. And actually, when someone in the room is vulnerable, you actually see neurobiologically how the other people in the room soften. It creates connection. Yeah. So be vulnerable, take that risk, show up. That's what I would tell employees. Yeah. Have a voice. Your voice matters. You deserve and need to be seen. And the only way to be seen is to take down the barriers, take down the armor, as Brene would say, don't armor up. Yeah. Stay brave and stay courageous. It's worth it. Yeah. The benefits outweigh the cost. And that's why I have you do that formula. Like, what could bad thing happen? Well, what good thing could happen if I was brave right now? Yeah. So I just say be brave.
So the name of your company?
Is regenerative workplaces.
Okay, love it.
That word comes from resource management, but rather than being depletive, which is what we did for resources in the environment for decades, we're turning into sustainability now. Well, regenerative is the next level. So there's 3 ways to manage a resource. You can deplete it, you can sustain it, you can make it better. Yeah. And I'm bringing that terminology to human resources. Yeah. So when you think of humans in your workplace, is your workplace depletive? Maybe it's sustaining, How can we make it regenerative? How can we make workplaces that actually improve humans and make humans better at the end of the day, at the end of the work week, so you're not spending the weekend trying desperately to fill the bucket that has been depleted all week long just to go back and do it all over again on Monday.
Right.
Let's make workplaces regenerative again.
Yeah.
Or for the first time.
And all your contact information is there. Do you have
Yes.
like price lists on your
I don't.
website?
I have a scheduling link where you can schedule
Okay.
a free 30-minute discovery session with me. That's where it starts.
Okay.
So my offerings are so customizable
Yeah.
that we really just talk through a company's needs, whether it's measurement of employee experience, which I do. I'm expert in employee engagement surveys and focus groups and interviews and qualitative research.
Okay.
Or gaps analysis, process improvement, or coaching. And team building. So any one of those we can pick from a menu, basically
Gotcha.
what your company needs, and we'll price accordingly. Yeah.
Okay. Sounds good.
Thank
you
you.
so much. This was helpful for me personally as well. And I definitely see us kind of working together and getting into
I'd love
other
to.
companies and sharing our strengths.
Yeah, I would love to amplify the work that you
Yeah.
do.
Thank you.
Thank you.